Good morning, and thank you for joining our webinar, Construction in the Time of COVID. My name is Gregg Young. Most of you attending today's webinar don't know me, but I started my career as a development partner with Trammell Crow Company right after business school at Stanford. At Crow, I learned how important construction is to value creation in real estate. I've had several roles in real estate since then. Currently, I'm a managing director with Stanfield Partners, a highly focused real estate technology venture and advisory firm. Stanfield is committed to innovating in the areas of construction, which is my area, data and analytics, operations, and capital markets, all centered around unique relationships with leading global owners and developers. It's my pleasure to serve as your moderator today. This webinar is sponsored by Stanford Professionals in Real Estate, or SPIRE, an alumni club of Stanford University formed in 2008 during the last Great Recession. SPIRE's purpose then was to connect Stanford alumni working in real estate so they could share expertise and support each other during those turbulent times. And here we are again, a dozen years later. But SPIRE is more than an alumni club. It is a mission-driven organization that serves a diverse community of alums, students, faculty, and others interested in accelerating innovation in the real estate industry. Among other things, SPIRE's programs support alumni networking and education, professional enrichment, and career development for students, which is oh so important at this time. At the end of today's program, we'll share with you how you too can support that mission. Today's session focuses on the here and now, the impact of COVID on key aspects of construction, touching worker safety, building design, project cost and schedule, and construction lending. As an industry, we are in the very early stages of learning how to cope. Most companies have only been at this since March. Problems and best practices are evolving daily, if not hourly. Related costs are certainly not fully known, and if you're looking for definitive answers, you won't find them. What you'll hear today is a snapshot of real situations leaders are facing and initial steps they're taking to meet new challenges caused by the pandemic. We will start with a story about one of the largest buildings ever built in Montana, where workers unexpectedly tested positive for COVID just this past March. From there, we will move to panel discussion of 4 key COVID-driven issues affecting construction. And finally, we'll conclude with questions and answers for the panel. Joining me today are 4 panelists with frontline roles in their respective companies and projects, all recently forced to address COVID as an added complexity to already complex projects. Our panel covers the gamut of owner, project manager, construction company, and lender perspectives. We're so pleased to have with us today Eric Christensen, EVP Hospitality for Lone Mountain Land Company, Big Sky, Montana. Morgan Traynor, Senior Director of Operational Excellence, Ryan Companies in Minneapolis. Nancy Moses, Senior Vice President, Trammell Crow Company, Los Angeles. And Derek Evans, EVP and Regional Manager for Wells Fargo Commercial Real Estate in Los Angeles. Now, I'm going to ask each of you to briefly introduce your company and highlight your project or role. Eric, could you start us off?
Sure, thanks, Greg. I work for Lone Mountain Land Company, which is based in Big Sky, Montana, where I'm responsible for the development of the Montage Big Sky project and other large hospitality projects. Lone Mountain Land is part of Cross Harbor Capital out of Boston, which is a large institutional real estate investor and developer. Here in Montana, we build about $500 million a year of luxury second homes, hospitality, and commercial projects, in the Big Sky communities of Yellowstone Club, Spanish Peaks, Moonlight Basin, and Big Sky Town Center. The Montage Big Sky is a $400 million ski and ski out resort built on the hillside. It's located in Spanish Peaks. It includes 100 hotel guest rooms, 39 condominium residences, restaurants and recreational amenities. The building overall is 6 stories above ground with 2 stories of underground parking. Like Gregg said, at 520,000 square feet, it will be the largest building in Montana when completed. And while that sounds impressive, Montana is not especially well known for large buildings. So you have to put that in perspective. We started construction in early 2019 and expect to finish next year in September of 2021, and then open for business 2 months later in December 2021. You can see from this picture that the majority of the building is now being enclosed. Steel erection is going on the remaining sections of the building on the left-hand side and will be done in the next few months. The goal is to have the entire building enclosed for this upcoming winter, and then, like I said, finish it in September of next year. So our project is well known in Montana. It's one of the first luxury resorts to be built in the Rocky Mountains in the last 15 years. We're known for the size of the project, its level of investment, and its luxury. But unfortunately, we also became well known 6 weeks ago as one of Montana's COVID hotspots. Even though we started implementing protocols in mid-March to protect our workers from the virus and to distance them, during the last week in March, we had 2 iron workers told us they had tested positive that week for the virus. As you can imagine, that created some excitement on the job site. So we then told all 20 of our iron workers that they had to stay home and self-quarantine for 14 days. We asked dozens of others of our workers to stay home and self-quarantine as they had come into contact with the iron workers on buses that bring much of our workforce to the site every day. Other members of the workforce just left on their own. That weekend, the Montana governor put out a shelter-in-place order. That order exempted construction as an essential activity, but that exemption was not very clearly written. So between our positive cases, our request for workers to self-quarantine, and the shelter-in-place orders, by that following Monday, our on-site workforce had dropped 70%. So that created some problems for us. We kept the job site open, and we took aggressive steps to clean our facilities and keep the workers' distance. We canceled all of our buses. We offered stipends to workers to self-drive to the site. And while we had some workers who were from out of town that were renting local accommodations and were 2 or 3 to a room, we rented extra hotel rooms for them so they could each be in individual rooms. Despite all of our best efforts, 2 weeks later, we found out from the county health department that 4 other workers we had told to quarantine had gone home and tested positive in their home counties. They never told us that this happened. So the county health department called us and notified us that we didn't have 2 positive cases, we had 6. That represented 2% of the infections in the entire state of Montana at that time. So the county health department commended us on our actions. We just find, hold on a second here, show you one of our press articles that we received. But we still had to contend with the publicity of being one of the state's hotspots. So we had brought in out-of-town workers who had threatened to infect the small mountain community of Big Sky, which has a population of only 3,000 people and otherwise had no other known cases. So as you can see here, the press questioned why a luxury hotel project was considered essential construction. It's a fair question. Some of the local residents asked the local government to shut down the project. At the same time, our project represents one of the largest investments being made in the state of Montana, and our workforce entreated us to stay open and keep paying our workers. So we remain focused on protecting our workers while continuing construction. Like everybody else, we're watching our supply chain very nervously. And when I go by the site and I see another worker hop in a car of somebody else, you know, I cringe. It's difficult to monitor a job site and not see violations almost everywhere. Fortunately, we've had no new infections over the past month, but like many of you listening to this webinar, I continue to worry about it every day.
So, Eric, I'm going to ask you to, yeah, thank you for unsharing your screen. So it sounds like you're having to manage both the appearance and the reality of compliance locally. And by appearance, I mean that in a positive way, because there's a visibility factor here that you have to take care of along with the reality of compliance with COVID measures. So what are the key elements of your approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. You do have to be aware of how your project appears to the public and within, especially within your local community. We had to monitor our workers' behavior in town because we had out-of-town workers who were staying and shopping at the local grocery store. I mean, to give you one example, when we rented those extra hotel rooms, I got a call from the sheriff 2 nights later, and he said that the guys that we had separated in different hotel rooms were all gathered in one room together having a party. Mm-hmm. So, wow. Yeah, little defeats the purpose of the separation. Mm-hmm. So we were very cognizant of our workers and how they were behaving in town. You know, one group had decided to hold a barbecue on the tailgate of their pickup, you know, in the middle of town after work one day. Also not a good move. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we had to work a lot with, you know, regarding the publicity on that. We spent a lot of time talking to the county health department, and we gave them our protocols and told them what we were doing. And so the good thing there is when we did have problems, the health department was on our side. They were aware of what we were doing, and they were impressed by what we were doing. Mm-hmm. We also look at social media just to make sure we understand what the community, how they perceive our project. And we've also participated in some online town halls that have been organized in the local community to let the public know what the facts are, because you can see on the social media, the facts get distorted very quickly. So it is important to get your story out there and get the facts out there to prevent that from happening.
Interesting. Now, I'm aware you've also introduced some technology on site. Could you give us a little background on why you selected it, what its effects have been, both on the acceptability by workers, effects on productivity, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think like everybody else, we've been cleaning extensively, and in terms of specific technology, we've had, try this. We've employed a couple things. So there's RFID technology that we use at our hoists, so that if too many people get into the elevator for the hoist, that sets off an alarm. We've also used that technology at break areas. It's similar to what some retailers use at their checkout stands. More recently, we've started working with this technology, which is RFID that you attach to either a hard hat or to a vest, construction vest. And that also sets off a warning if workers are too close to each other. This is early for us. You know, a lot of workers don't like electronic surveillance, and I would argue construction workers like it even less. So I can't tell you yet whether this is being successful, but I think it's important to try, you know, try different things and show people that you're doing, you know, making your best effort to try to keep your workers safe, and keep the community safe.
Have you had, excuse me, have you had any initial feedback from the workers themselves, or have you just observed how well they're able to continue using it?
Yeah, that last device I showed was supposed to be implemented starting on Monday last week, and I walked the site yesterday, and I would say maybe 20% had picked it up. So we're still talking with the general contractor about how hard they're enforcing that and how it's being perceived. So we're still in the early days on that one.
Okay, good. Well, Eric, thank you so much. That's a great insight from somebody who's in the throes of trying to resolve something on site that was completely unexpected. And it's important. We wanted to start the program with that kind of real life story so that people could get a sense for some of the many issues that come up. So next we're going to turn to another issue. We're going to start with our panel issues now. Issue number one is, how has COVID changed construction procedures on site? And I'm going to ask Nancy to introduce herself first, and then to jump into the answer to that question. Now, so far, Nancy, you've not had any workers on site test positive for COVID, but you have had to adopt COVID measures. In the course of your introduction, can you tell us approximately when this started?
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. I'm Nancy Moses. I'm a Senior Vice President with Trammell Crow Company. Trammell Crow Company is one of the nation's leading developers with over $17.2 billion in process or in the pipeline. We have 18 offices currently nationwide, and also including our new office in London. And Trammell Crow Company focuses on office, healthcare, multifamily, retail, and industrial developments. Speaking to the projects that I'm working with currently, we recently just completed a 52,000 square foot medical office building in Willowbrook, California, and also in the process of constructing a 468,000 square foot office building in Koreatown, Los Angeles. So I will share my screen and show you the Vermont Corridor project, which is a 21-story office tower. This is for the County of Los Angeles, and the construction of this project started in October of 2018, and we anticipate being complete with this in October of 2021. So roughly, I would say in March is when, the middle of March, beginning of March, this is the current kind of status of the construction. We started to hear some rumblings about COVID and the impacts and what the city wanted to do, the city and the county wanted to do, really in order to enact some safety measures. A lot of offices in Los Angeles actually started closing down before the city did require the office shutdowns, I would say about a week before. Which was beneficial, I think, for our contractor, because we really did start the communication process of what if, how are we going to handle these situations? How are we going to create some safety parameters? And I would say the biggest thing is the flexibility that is required in order to ensure that as things are changing, as rules and regulations are changing, that our contractor is flexible enough to change as it has happened. As soon as we heard the 6 foot distance, you can see in this upper left-hand corner here, we started implementing rules where our contractors, before they came into the site, they needed to check in every single day. We wanted to make sure that there were no temperature issues. We wanted to make sure that everyone felt healthy, that there was no concerns. Started working with the unions. We work with the county. We worked with the city. We worked with OSHA to try and ensure that we are following every rule and regulation that's out there, and make sure that if we think that there's other safety measures that need to be taken into account, we have done that as well. One of the big ones and one of the big impacts is man lifts. In order to keep the safe social distance, for a 21-story building, we can only have 2 personnel get into a man lift at any given time, which is very, very difficult when you have over 200 employees trying to get up through the building. But we are definitely working through that, making sure that we can come up with ways to not let it impact the project, but also ensure that we have the safety parameters in place. You can see face masks have become the new construction attire, as has the fact that we are making sure we implement sterile environment, cleaning toilets, which I'm sure is somebody's favorite job to do, but it's also very, very important. We are wiping down handrails. We're doing everything we can. And again, just maintaining constant communication with the subcontractors, with the county, with the city, with everybody, to make sure that we're moving and changing and shifting as things are progressing.
Do you want to unshare your screen?
Sure.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Nancy. I'm going to ask this question. Are you using technology per se to help with compliance? Is that something that's come up?
So Right now, the use of technology and the distance is not something that we are implementing on the project site. A lot of it has to do with the security issues with the contractor. The way that we've handled it in this particular project, and I think every project is going to be different based on that situation, we have hired 4 full-time COVID supervisors to make sure that we are implementing all the rules and checking with all of our subcontractors. On a daily basis, as we're scheduling the work and working with our subcontractors, we have a big enough site, big enough project, that we are able to correctly spread out our subcontractors based on the work that needs to take place. And so a lot of the 6-foot distance, but for the morning where we have our supervisors, is really kind of handling itself. I think that there is a concern, in order to make sure that we're complying with union requirements, we're complying with all of the different requirements. And then, from a HIPAA standpoint, there's some things that we want to make sure that we can get approved first and that people are comfortable with first. And there are some security issues that, by requiring certain technologies, we need to make sure that everyone's comfortable with that.
Okay, we are early in the game, I realize this, but have you done any estimates on what is going to be the cost of these COVID measures and how to bracket it?
Yeah, we've looked at it in a couple of different ways. I think obviously every project developer, every contractor is looking at it inefficiencies. The reason that a lot of these rules have been implemented is really to make sure that everyone stays and maintains safe distance. But for example, the man lift rule, adding 2 different people or only allowing 2 different people in a man lift at any given time, really does take up between a half an hour to an hour every day of just work, actual work that could take place. So if you add that up, 200 employees, contractors times an hour every single day, you are losing about $20,000 a day. Trying to figure out ways that we can work through that and we can mitigate that. And I think, everybody, after having received all of these safety parameters and feeling very comfortable to work on the site, everyone is motivated to keep this project moving, to keep moving and doing it in a safe manner. So I think the ways that they can try and make projects efficient and just be ready to move forward. But I think we are looking at what the impacts could be. We're working with the subcontractors to see where we have float, where we could shift and change and move so that we could reduce our inefficiencies. And this is going to be a constant piece of communication and a constant shift within our project schedule as we move forward and try and, handle all these new adversities that come up on a daily basis.
Well, thank you. So now I'm going to turn to Morgan. And Morgan, Ryan Group has implemented an enterprise level task force to come up with best practice COVID protocol, which you will ultimately implement across all your projects. Could you briefly explain how this enterprise level approach is working?
Yeah, thanks. So I'll give a little bit of background to Ryan Companies just to set a precedence for our size and reach as it compares to the others on the panel. So Ryan Companies is headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're a $2 billion real estate developer and general contractor. We're privately held, family-owned, 4th generation, and we've been around for a little over 80 years with roughly 1,500 employees. We have 15 offices nationally, heavily invested in the Midwest and the Southern belt of the U.S. And our 5 major units consist of architecture and engineering, construction, capital markets, then real estate development and management. And so that kind of gives you a bit of a perspective into Ryan. My role as a part of the Operational Excellence Group is spearheading initiatives and promoting best practices across architecture and engineering, our A&E group, our construction, and our pre-construction groups. And so to your question, Greg, as it relates to the task force, our task force started mid-March, right after Kirkland in the Seattle suburb had really started to be one of the first areas in the U.S. to have an outbreak. We have an office in Kirkland, and so it became very urgent and very important to us right away. The task force that's been around for roughly 8 weeks now is led by our CFO, and the group includes roughly 20 to 30 people that are a part of our executive leadership team, our C-suite, and then department heads throughout the organization. And while my focus on today's panel is primarily the construction protocols that we've implemented, having the leaders of HR and marketing and our PR team be a part of this task force has ensured that we've been able to have an integrated model throughout all of Ryan, so that we're able to kind of tackle all the various issues that have come across. So this task force has met every single day. We've reduced that now to every other day, but we meet very regularly. And a spinoff now, as we've gone through this task force or this COVID pandemic for the last 8 weeks, is we now have another task force dedicated to just the re-entry back into the job sites and also back into our offices.
Okay. You only have 8 weeks behind you or thereabouts, so it's still very early on, but what's the most promising work product you're seeing come out of the task force?
Well, I would have to say we've had an enormous amount of really positive outcomes that have come from our task force. When we think about putting 1,500 people and getting them set up to work from home or work remotely, when typically that was something that they weren't able or accustomed to doing, I would say just the integrated model or integrated best practices between all of our departments to really ensure that everyone's mental, emotional health is on the forefront. But as it relates more to the construction and the job site pieces of this task force over the last 2 months, I think we are really energized in the way that we've been able to develop protocols, refinement of those over time, train, track, and record all the costs and time impacts that COVID has put on all of us. And all of those lessons learned are things that we'll be able to leverage together as a unit post-COVID.
So Morgan, you and I have several questions prepared, but I've got an eye on the clock here, and I want to make sure we get in the one question that I was most impressed with, which is the question about your dashboards and what you guys have come up with in terms of data analysis. So if we could focus on that, I think that's the best use of time.
Great. So I'm sharing my screen now. And what I plan on walking through over just the next few minutes is really demonstrating, when I spoke about protocols, is where we kind of started with our task force and what our goals were so that we were able to come out of this with some real documentation and some real data. And so the 2 dashboards that I have, one of which is primarily focused on job site productivity utilization or lack thereof with productivity. And the second part has to do with cost. And so as Nancy mentioned right before me, a lot of the costs or a lot of the schedule, we're starting to put some numbers together, but a lot of it is just a big question mark as we don't really know how long this is going to last. And so the task force and kind of our subcommittee within the construction group is we really wanted to focus on documenting everything. And so with our legal team, we were able to put some protocols in place, some basic checklists, some forms, things that allowed our superintendents and our project managers who are out at the job site each and every day to begin to track the productivity loss, the lack of materials that were being delivered, or any other shutdowns. And we knew that if we started with documentation, that then we would have a lot of information, regardless of what situation we ended up in, whether it was asking for a schedule push or asking for additional costs or just having to have discussions with our subcontractors and owners. And so for the last 8 weeks, we've been collecting a lot of really rich data, and all of this is free for Ryan. It's time spent that our project teams are having to exert, but we didn't implement a new tool or a new software. This was all just built within our existing system. So again, back to these dashboards quickly, we couldn't have the dashboards without any of the data. So for the last 2 months, we've been collecting information, and this dashboard here on the screen really speaks to our material delays, our manpower shortages, and any shutdowns. And so it's, of course, very filtered down to just a specific sector that we have here. But what this does is really allows us to see at a 30,000-foot overview level, whether it's a region, an office, or a sector at Ryan Companies, how are we being impacted by COVID? And all of this is simply being tracked in forms that our superintendents and project managers were doing each and every day. So then the second dashboard that I have here relates to the cost impact. And so it's really easy for us to see each and every day how many of our subcontractors are not showing up at full capacity, or the materials that aren't being delivered. That's really tangible. And now we are working through the ways of being able to monetize that or put that into real terms that speak to our owners and subcontractors, like schedule delays and cost impacts. And so this dashboard, what it does is it highlights the risk that we run, what subcontractors are not coming out to our job sites on time, and how large of a contract do we have with them. That's one really key kind of risk mitigation area that we can begin to evaluate. This dashboard here speaks directly to the costs that we're incurring each and every day, whether it's materials like hand washing stations or other kind of safety and health measures that we're taking out at the job sites, or if it's additional labor that we have instilled on our job site so that we have some additional COVID management or oversight. And all of this now is being tracked based on the actuals, and we're asking our project teams to begin to forecast what additional costs or additional expenditures that they plan on spending. And so then all of this information is being reviewed by our construction leaders with those individual project teams, specifically if they run the risk of needing a lot of support based on the location of their job site. And so again, to kind of summarize these dashboards, it's really just an opportunity for our leaders to review nationally how COVID is impacting Ryan Companies in a very tangible way that's outside of just calling every superintendent or project manager and asking them how they're feeling. This is a real number or a real date that we have this data. It's helping us to tell a story of the COVID impact. And again, without knowing how long this is going to last, these dashboards will become vital into our daily review of our job sites.
Super impressive, Morgan. Again, keeping an eye on the clock here, there's more that Morgan and I prepared for, but I'd like to move on to issue number 2. Has COVID impacted building design and occupancy? And Nancy, I wanted you to speak to this. Your project's being built for occupancy by an LA County agency. What impact has 6-foot separation and heightened awareness of hygiene had on the project design?
So a lot of it, we are fortunate to have already designed into the project. The workstations that we already had were 7 feet by 7 feet, so that has already allowed for the different users to come in. What we are doing, however, is going through all of the design elements, all of the parameters that we have put in place to make sure that when the users are ready to move in, when the building is complete, that we have all the safety measures in place that they would really need, that would make them feel comfortable. This is a really high quality, best in class, as well as safe office building. So we did look at the furniture, even though we had designed it. Are there ways that we could add even better safety parameters, giving you a personal panel that's made of laminate can be sterilized, looking into fabrics that are bleach cleanable so that, again, if somebody is sick, they can clean it. Working with the county and ensuring that we have the right IT infrastructure. They can now have VPNs. Some people can work from home. Are they going to reduce maybe the initial group that comes into the building? So instead of having 2,600 employees on day one, they reduce it down to 19 to 2,000 employees, and they spread it out, or they come up with different work shifts so that we can then create a touchdown space for the desk. Instead of making it a personal desk, it's now touchdown space. It still allows the flexibility. It still incorporates the collaboration that I think is really important for different office users. Other things that we're all also looking into, and again, we were very fortunate that we had designed well standards into this building. So what can we do with the HVAC system? We have carbon filters. Can we add UV lighting into the carbon filters to even create a safer environment? Working with the property managers, what are some of the ways that we can ensure that we have the proper cleaning, and that the maintenance, we maybe step it up. They come out once a month, once every other week to clean everything even more thoroughly and sterilize more thoroughly. Looking at restrooms, what are touch-free, what needs to be touch-free, just thinking through all of the day-to-day important items that most employees will touch, or we can make them not touch.
It's unbelievable the amount of extra work COVID has created. Let's turn to one other issue, and that is, has the number of has the county discussed the number of employees who will permanently work from home, and how will that change from your original plan?
So our project, and with any building, when you design it, you start with a preliminary number. This is what our head count is estimated to be when the project is delivered, and this is what we think our 10-year future growth will be. We obviously designed for the future growth. In our conversations with the county, and I'm hearing with other office tenants as well, it's not going to be 100% stay home. I do believe that there are going to be some shifts and splits, and maybe a couple days you work from home or one day you work from home, and they figure out how they can break it up. That might mean some consolidation, because the desks are no longer for this specific person and they come in and this is their only desk. If they can bring other people in and they can ensure the proper sterilization measures, then they probably will just lessen the load per se. But I do think it's not going to be 100% employees staying home and working from home. I think that they will allow for that flexibility. It makes a lot of sense, and a lot of companies are shifting into that in some form or fashion. It's just not going to take away the whole requirement or need for office.
Okay, very good. So let's move on here. I'm going to jump to the next issue. I want to make sure we don't miss some of the issues we promised we'd touch. The third issue is really how is the COVID crisis impacting project completion dates, and who is going to pay, or who is paying for costs to avoid delays in completion? And Morgan, let's start off with you. Can you comment on that?
So I can comment a little on this, but what we started to communicate right when COVID began in mid-March was we reached out to our owners and our subcontractors, and we really tried to demonstrate that while we want to partner alongside them during this really uncertain time, our contract that we have with both parties is forcing us to have to, require our subcontractors to give us proper legal notice of any of their manpower or material issues that would cause a delay. And of course, we want to be really transparent with our owner as well. But at the time in March, we just didn't have any information other than to say, we're working on it and we're moving, and we'll make sure to stay open with what's happening. And so in March, as we would have been kind of communicating with our owner, some of our job sites, especially on the West Coast, were impacted with COVID immediately, while most of our other offices across the nation hadn't experienced any COVID impacts. So it wasn't until about 6 weeks later, so towards the end of April, where we had more exposure nationally, where we were reaching out to our owners and subcontractors and saying, here's what we're seeing for productivity losses, here's what we're seeing with subcontractors that are on critical paths, and just communicating more so in a more formal way. And so for right now, that's really all we have. We have a force majeure, obviously, in our owner contracts right now. But for our newer contracts that we're writing, as we've actually won work during this really crazy COVID time, that force majeure is no longer a viable kind of legal statement. So instead, we're working with our subcontractors and owners on how to move forward, even with some uncertainty as far as cost and schedule goes.
Okay, great. Again, I'm going to move forward to issue number 4 and then maybe come back to some of these other issues. But issue number 4 is, what effect is COVID having on construction lending? And that's really broken into 3 parts, or I'd like to break it into 3 parts, Derek, and that is existing construction loans, shutdowns, and new loans. So let's start with existing loans, so existing construction loan. What are you closely watching on your outstanding loans at this time?
Sure, and Greg, thanks for having me.
Oh, and you should, excuse me for interrupting, but you should definitely give an introduction of Wells Fargo.
Yeah, I will. I'll help set the stage. So I manage Wells Fargo's commercial real estate group's real estate banking office for Greater Los Angeles. And I'm primarily the bank's what I would call bridge construction lender for borrowers, developers that are based in Los Angeles that may be doing projects or own real estate all over the country. We have offices similar to mine across most major metropolitan areas. Wells Fargo as a whole is the largest real estate lender in the country. We have about 140 billion of outstanding loan balances as of the fiscal year end, of which roughly 100 billion of that is within commercial real estate, which is our core business, of which my group is part of. To give everybody some perspective, from a construction perspective, at year end, Wells Fargo had roughly $37 billion of construction loans committed, of which 20 billion was outstanding. In fiscal year 2019, commercial real estate, so again, our kind of our core business within the bank, originated just under 12 billion of new construction loans, which compared to about 9.5 billion in 2018. Thus far, through at least the end of March in 2020, our commercial real estate division has originated about 2 billion of new construction loans. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about what we're seeing now, Greg, in a little bit. From my personal perspective, I manage a book of about $5.5 billion of real estate loans for borrowers based out of Los Angeles, which includes about $1 billion of construction loans today. Typically, my book is anywhere between 15 to 20% of our portfolio is construction loans. And we are financing active construction projects in Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Seattle, and Hawaii. Most of our clients are institutional in nature. So, you know, we're typically dealing with kind of the best of the best across the United States. And about 75% of the lending that I do, whether they're standing loans or they're construction loans, are limited to non-recourse. So to answer your question, you know, I think what we're really focusing on, you know, very, very closely, I mean, first and foremost is if we have construction projects that have stopped, we're focusing on when those are going to start again. Other areas that we're focused on include interest reserve adequacy, cost overruns, budget shortfalls, any type of construction delivery dates that we have in our loan documents. We're focused on any type of tenant delivery dates that tenants may have in their leases. We're focused on co-tenancy provisions. We're focused on potential absorption issues given delays that could be caused in terms of when projects delivered, as long as, in addition to, you know, our clients delivering in this potential environment. And I think lastly, we're just focusing on the general changing market conditions that have been caused by the pandemic, which frankly are still a little bit of an unknown as we sit here today.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to ask a question that's obvious to you, but maybe some of the people that are listening in would wonder about. How is the bank handling borrower requests to fund COVID-related additional worker safety during construction and post-occupancy improvements such as touchless elevators, automated doors, and occupancy detection?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think Eric and Nancy and Morgan all brought up some great points. And I think observations that we're seeing from a lot of our other clients across our platform. And I think big picture, Wells Fargo is obviously very, very supportive of any type of additional COVID requirements or restrictions that are needed on sites. That said, and I think Morgan started to allude to a little bit of it, obviously those costs are not included in our original budget. So if those costs if we don't have enough contingency in our loan budget to cover those costs, as we look at the contingency for the overall project, it would be our expectation that our clients are putting in additional equity to cover those costs. And I think it's going to be deal dependent, right? Because you may have some construction loans that we just started that could be a hole in the ground that have basically all of their contingency, but you could have some other projects that are maybe 3-4 months from completion that have exhausted a big chunk of their contingency. And, there could be other cost overruns besides just related to COVID. So if there's dollars available within the budget via contingency, absolutely they can use that. If not, it's the expectation that our clients would put additional equity into the projects.
Okay. Let's talk about shutdowns. How extensive have COVID-related shutdowns been in the Wells Fargo portfolio?
Yeah. So just like I think all the other folks on the call here, we started a task force right away. So I think we've got pretty good visibility into it. I would say first and foremost, most of the projects that we have financed where we've had shutdowns have been mandatory in nature, meaning that they have been shut down by municipalities. We've had a few where the shutdowns have been voluntary, like Eric had discussed, where they had identified several cases on site. We've had situations like that where our contractors or our developers have decided to shut down. But surprisingly, we don't have as many shutdowns as you would think. And I think that's primarily because most of our projects have been deemed to be essential. So this data is about a week old, but as of last week, again, with kind of in our core real estate banking business, so the group that I'm in, we had 465 construction loans on our books. Of that, only 78 or about 17% were shut down. And even since last week, we've had projects that have reopened for construction. I can tell you for my book personally, we had 2 shutdowns. We had one in Fremont, which was an industrial project, and we had one in Seattle, which was an apartment project. And as of earlier this week, both of those projects are now again open for construction.
Okay, good. Morgan, if I can, I'd like to jump back in here. The question is, what does it cost, or what's a ballpark range of cost for shutting down a project and starting it up again? Kind of fishing for, it's all project dependent, of course, but is there a range that you guys have seen at Ryan that would apply?
Most of the costs right now that we're seeing are just your general conditions and maybe the loss of productivity that you're experiencing while still needing to have a job site trailer and all of the monthly and weekly fees and labor that you are paying for. So one practice that we're doing right now is to help clean the job site in a really cost-effective way. Is some of our job sites are working just Monday through Thursday, and we might be increasing the number of hours, but by closing the job site Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that is that 72-hour window that we're seeing where if there is or was any COVID impact or anyone with a symptom out of the job site, that might be a natural time for that site to be cleaned. So I would say that our shutdown and startup costs, because to Derek's point, the number of projects that we've seen actually have to shut down has been very minimal. It's primarily been in our Seattle and California projects that, you know, we're under 10%, maybe even closer to 5% of our projects nationally, which spans about 125 active job sites, have actually needed to shut down. And if there are any instances where we just want to take that precaution, we are maybe just adjusting our weekly schedule to help close the job site for that 72-hour period. So outside of just checking your burn rates and understanding your general conditions at this point, I think we're just too early to really have a lot of monetary data to move forward with, other than when our owners have come to us and said, we want to hire additional people or we want to expedite your schedule. But that's been very owner by owner so far.
Okay, very good. So we've got about 7 minutes left or so in the moderated portion of this, and then we'll wrap up. New loans, real quick. Is there a quick summary you could give us, Derek, about where Wells Fargo is in terms of not making loans at this time? I mean, we understand that that's why that is, but could you give us some color behind that decision, and then maybe go right into just a few of the things you'll want to see when construction does start back in terms of new underwriting?
Yeah, sure, not a problem. You know, as you mentioned, Gregg, Wells Fargo is not really actively looking for new construction loans at this juncture. That being said, I don't think that's unique to Wells Fargo. As I'm out talking with my, you know, either big bank peers or regional peers, I think that's the general consensus. You know, frankly, we are very focused on closing up our existing pipeline, and we're still closing deals that were under application. And we're focused on asset management. And I think that's true for not only banks, but also for our clients. I think secondly, it's just really, really hard to underwrite today. You know, we're in a situation where basically the entire economy is shut down. I know we're starting to see things start to open back up, but it's really hard to underwrite when we don't know what the impact is going to be on vacancy, what the impact is going to be on absorption, rental rates. Are we going to have you know, changing trends or changing you know, demographics just in terms of how people look at real estate and how they use it. So it's just really hard to underwrite today. You know, I'm hopeful within a couple of months we'll have more clarity on the economy and the impacts on real estate, and we'll be able to start you know, looking at new deals. And then secondly, and I think quickly, some of the things that I would expect to see as we, you know, move into this cycle and we start to look at new opportunities, I think you're going to see increased spread, so increased pricing on deals. I think you're going to see less spec risk that lenders are willing to be able to take, and more pre-leasing requirements. I think you're going to see higher debt yields or debt service coverages from an underwriting perspective. I think you're going to see us really look at budgets to make sure that we feel there's adequate contingency, as that's been something that's been pushed down, I think, in this last cycle. I think you're going to see lower non-recourse loan to costs, and I think you're just going to see tighter underwriting in general in terms of how lenders look at rents, vacancies, and things of that nature.
Thank you. Eric, I'm going to loop back to you, and we're going to go back to the question of how the COVID crisis is impacting project completion dates. You had a judgment call that you had to make in terms of extending the scheduled completion date due to COVID on your project. Could you give us a little insight about how you thought about that, or how their owners came to grips with the extension they finally did work into their contract?
Sure, Greg. Like lots of projects, we have with our general contractor liquidated damages for schedule delays, and the general contractor passed many of those down to their subcontractors. So it was difficult because for our subcontractors, some of whom we told you must self-quarantine at home because you were on the bus, they were still being held to the schedule and the liquidated damages in their original contract. We all realized that it was a changed world and that you couldn't hold people responsible to those original commitments. So what we did is we told our general contractor to selectively give out 2 to 3 week delays to subcontractors where they thought that was appropriate. And I think that cleared the air. Subcontractors who did leave the site felt like they had enough time to reorganize and come back to the site. And that extra 2 or 3 weeks, I think, kept us all trusting each other and moving forward and not looking at the language in our contracts. So that's how we've dealt with it. I don't know, we had, 2 or 3 weeks seemed like a easy price to pay at that point. If we have another outbreak and things get worse going forward, I think it'll be more difficult.
Okay. But for this go around, it was more of a collaborative than a contentious process to get to a resolution.
I can't say there wasn't 1 or 2 contentious discussions between the general contractor and 1 or 2 subs, but for the most part, yes, it was cooperative.
Cool. We're getting close to the end here. I want to jump to one Q&A. We had a number of questions lined up, but I think in just looking at what would be helpful, I want to make an appeal to you guys to put yourself in the shoes of students graduating this year and looking at careers and wanting to be in the construction and development business. And I'd like for a couple of you to just give them maybe your insights on how you'd go about that or how you think about that. Morgan, I know you've given some thought to this. Could you give us your view or how you've thought about that in the past for yourself?
Sure. So I graduated a year before the 2008 recession. And so I found myself just a year into my career unemployed from the construction industry. And what I did is I looked outside of the norm for maybe a career path, and I went and I worked overseas where construction and lending was still really strong. And so I spent the next few years back and forth, but primarily working for overseas clients, also getting my MBA at the time. And so my advice is just simply to look for opportunities outside of a traditional model and just try to enjoy the adventure. Some might call it a crisis, some might call it an adventure. It's just the way that you approach it. Ultimately, a few years later, once the US economy came back, I was able to join Ryan Companies and have been here ever since. So advice is simply just leveraging your problem-solving skills and looking for opportunities.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, I'm sorry we're kind of at our end here. We need to kind of wrap up, but let me make some adjustments here on my screen. So thank you to all who joined this webinar today. What you saw as attendees was a much more granular discussion than our previous webinar on retail trends. Yet among all the details about COVID compliance, there were some important hints at broader change to come. So when you hear Nancy Moses suggest conversations are starting with the county about some of the jobs becoming permanent work from home or part-time work from home, touchdown stations, and arranging shifts at work, there's a meta message in there. The definition of the workplace is actually happening. So again, I want to thank all the panelists. Great job today. Appreciate all the preparation. Thank you to Lauren Barley and Arzo Benai and SPIRE's leadership for supporting this panel. And I'd like to give a special shout out to Danielle DeBuncio, Matt Curry, and Wayne Brandt for helping me recruit this great panel. And just one more thing, please go to spirestanford.org and become a full SPIRE member. If you have questions about how to get to that site, feel free to contact Lauren. But as stated at the outset, your membership contributions are more important than ever, and you don't have to be an alum to join. Meantime, be safe, be healthy, and be back on May 22nd for the next SPIRE webinar, Accelerating the Future of Construction. Thank you all, and goodbye.